Hello, and welcome to the Brenton Peck podcast. Today, I'm talking with Doug Crist, a man who went from addiction, prison, and near suicide to being radically changed by God and helping others find freedom through regeneration at Rockharbor. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's go all the way back. You have quite the story. Where would you start it?
So I'll just give you my whole history, I guess. I was born and raised here, born in St. Luke's, at St. Luke's, as was my father and my grandfather. We moved to Portland when I was really, really young. I barely remember that. And then we moved back to North Carolina, which is where my mom's from. And I have quite a few memories of that. We lived with my grandparents for a while and then got our own house. That's where my youngest sister was born. She's 5 years behind me. And then we moved back to Idaho. And I remember starting first grade at Monroe Elementary, and I'll tell this funny little story. So I barely remember this, but my grandpa would always pick me up from school, and this boy asked if I wanted to walk home from school with him, and I was like, sure, and I followed him to his house, and then he was like, okay, see you later. And I had no idea where I was or how to find grandma's house or anything. And a police officer picked me up and asked my name and took me back to my grandma's house. And I got in big trouble for because they showed up to pick me up and I wasn't nowhere to be found. But so yeah, we lived with them, I don't know, several months. It seemed like I said, I was in first grade. And then we moved down. The first house I really remember was down in the north end on 11th and Sherman. And I have a lot of memories from that house. Some of them good, some of them not so good. So my dad was... he was an alcoholic, and one of the biggest memories of that house was I remember he came home late one night, and all us kids were still in bed, and then I heard my mom and dad start arguing, and like stuff was banging around, and then all of a sudden, here comes my mom. She's like, come on, we're leaving. And she packed all us kids up in the car, and she had forgotten her keys in the house, and she wasn't going to go back in there. And he was in the house in a rage. And so we walked about 14 blocks to my aunt's house, down the alleys, and Mom kept looking to see if he was going to come after us or anything. And so we went to my aunt's house and stayed the night. And then I remember my mom left that morning and left us there. And then she came back several hours later and said, okay, we're going home. And we walked in the house, and there was still some broken stuff around. But she told me later that she had cleaned up the house quite a bit. And I guess after we left, my dad just, in a rage, just broke a bunch of stuff. He had a brand new bass guitar. I don't know what, he broke that and kicked in his amplifier, and he was all, his hands were cut up, and he was sitting there in his chair, and we lined up one by one, me and my two sisters, and he apologized to us. And he said, the only thing I really remember him saying, I mean, of course he said, I'm sorry, but I remember him saying, this will never happen again. And that was when he started going to Alcoholics Anonymous. And that was my first introduction to Alcoholics Anonymous. Us kids would go once in a while, and they had, so this was he got sober at the Grapevine, and which is kind of iconic here in this valley. But we would go to Alateen, and most of the time we just dinked around and played and kind of made the kid that was trying to run the meeting mad. And but life got a lot better after that. My dad wasn't abusive to us. I remember getting maybe 3 whippings with a belt, and it was always because I deserved it and I did something wrong. I got introduced to drinking and doing drugs and stuff really early. I remember, so I have a younger sister, 5 years, my junior, and then my older sister is 2 or 3 years older than me. And I remember one summer we got into sniffing airplane model glue, and we got caught doing that, me and my older sister. And my mom, that was one of the scariest times I got a whipping, because she made us stay in our bedroom until, wait till your father gets home. And I got a whipping for that. And I guess, so it was during that time after my dad got sober, he bought a ski boat. And I found out later he kind of got some flack from his dad, because he kind of went in debt to get that ski boat. And my dad's argument was, well, I just want to do something for the family, And so we started going up to Lucky Peak and Air Rock every summer and water skiing and camping, and he had quit drinking, and he was a totally different man after that. And those times really brought our family together. And I guess finally my grandpa told him that was probably the best investment that you ever made. He didn't see it at the time, but so I think I was in probably 5th or 6th grade when he bought that boat. And me and my mom had a little competition on who could get up on a slalom ski first, and she won. But I was determined, and that the same day she got up and skied successfully, I did too that same day.
Nice.
But yeah, that kind of healed our family, I feel like. And so my older sister, both of my parents were smokers, cigarette smokers, and I started experimenting with that really young, like 3rd or 4th grade. And by 6th grade, I usually had a pack of cigarettes, And when my older sister started experimenting with marijuana, I wanted to be cool like her, and so I did too. And so I think it was the summer of 5th grade, is when I first started smoking weed. And I remember, so I went to Longfellow Elementary and then went to North Junior High, and we had, there was a little corner that we all used to go to in the mornings before school would start, and everybody would be smoking cigarettes, and every once in a while we'd be smoking weed. And I remember a couple times going to class just baked, and of course that didn't do my grades any good or anything like that. And it was probably about, well, I think towards the end of seventh grade, my parents found a house, a new house to rent out in Eagle, and huge, big old farmhouse, and the rent was super cheap, and that's why they wanted to go. But back then, like, Eagle was not like it is today. It was very, like, that was way out in the country back then, you know?
Yeah.
And I was so mad. I finished seventh grade. We moved out there, and then Mom would bring us to school before she had to go to work. And I was just so mad that we moved out there because, you know, I didn't know anybody. And so I started the next school year at Lowell Scott. Back then it wasn't middle school, it was junior high. And I made friends quick. Back then I had hair down to my shoulders, and I was part of the stoner group or whatever, but I got along with everybody, and I made friends really quick. And but I remember my first semester, I was just kind of like, I don't want to be here. And like, I think I got four F's on my report card. And my dad got that report card. And so my favorite all-time band still to this day is Rush. And I had already had tickets to a concert. They were coming to Boise. Back then, a lot of the concerts were at the fairgrounds at the Expo Center. And when he saw that report card, he said, you're grounded for a month, and you are not going to that concert. And I went to the concert anyway, and I didn't come home for like 3 or 4 days. And they both knew I was over at my friend's house most of the time that lived in a subdivision right down the road. And I think it was 2 or 3 nights later, she just came over there and, you ready to come home now? And I'm like, yeah. So got in the car and pulled into our driveway, and there's an Ada County sheriff sitting there. And I was like, what's going on, Mom? She goes, you'll find out. Walked in the house, and my dad and this cop were sitting at the table, and I went to juvenile detention that night, and for runaway, and there was one other charge that they said, but I don't remember. I just know I was scared.
Yeah.
You know, and so I went to juvenile detention. I had just stayed one night, and then they came and picked me up. They came and picked me up the next afternoon, and my dad was like, so you learned your lesson? I said, yeah, Dad, I don't want to go back there. He goes, well, don't do that again. So, like I said, I started smoking a long time before that. My mom would, every once in a while, she'd give me a cigarette, you know, and so we're in the car driving home from juvie, and she lit up a cigarette, and I looked at her, and I gave her the look, and she goes, "Dear, do you care if Douglas has a cigarette?" He goes, "I don't care." And so that's when I started smoking in front of them. And so I got my act together and made grades good enough to pass, And once I had some friends and stuff out there in Eagle, life wasn't horrible. So finished ninth grade. By the time I got to my 10th grade year, me and my best friend Mark, we just skipped school all the time, and we're more busy getting stoned than anything else. And I managed to get through 10th grade. And my junior year, I got I don't even know if I made it halfway through the year, and the vice principal called me down to his office, and he was like, "Crist, I don't even know why you're showing up." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, because if you had so many absences, you lost your credits." He goes, "You've missed so much school, you don't even have any credits." And I was like, "Okay, bye." And I remember hitchhiking from Meridian High School down to Eagle. At the time, I was working part-time at Jerry's Market, and my dad was a meat cutter by trade, but he was actually the store manager at Jerry's Market at the time. And I walked in there and I said, "Dad, can you put me on full-time?" He just looked at me. He goes, "Why?" I said, "Because I just dropped out of school." And he said, "Well, I guess so, because now you're going to start paying rent." And so he put me on full-time, and I later got my GED, and that's part of the rest of my story. But life was good then. Like I was working full-time. For a kid my age, I had plenty of money all the time, and I ended up buying this pretty decent looking 66 Chevy pickup. And actually, my dad helped me get my first car. I came home one day. This was after I was working full-time, and there's this old beat up Mercury, and with the hood up, and he's in there doing whatever. I'm like, "Whose car?" And he's like, "It's yours. You owe me $200. I'm like, "Okay." And I drove that thing around and saved some money, and then finally got that pickup, and just kept smoking weed all the time. And we'd have kegs, I had a group of guys that we always hung around together. And looking back, so there was 3 of us in high school that it was me and my buddy Mark and his best friend from Washington that came back and graduated from Meridian. He lived with Mark for a while, Bob. And Bob was the smart one. He graduated, and then right out of high school, he enlisted in the Army. And he made a career out of it. I don't know if that was his plan all along, but he's retired now, and has a big house in Washington with a pool, and so yeah, I worked at that little grocery store for a long time. Eventually, I was kind of running the dairy department, putting in orders every week and learning how to do all that kind of stuff. And then Bob at the time was dating this girl. I don't even remember how they met, but that's where I met my first wife, was at a party. And we ended up hanging out together, and we just kind of turned into best friends, my first wife, Tracy. And did all the things that young kids do, and I think so. Jerry's Market got bought out, and I stayed on for a while, but they made so many changes that I didn't want to work there anymore. And my dad left too, but for a while I went with Eric Roundy. He did pole fences, and his dad and grandpa, that was their big business. And I went to California to work and help Eric put in pole fence, and that's when I found out that Tracy was pregnant. And so I came back, and this whole time we had been kind of lying to her parents and saying that I was still in school, and so we had to come clean on all of that. So there was a meeting with her mom and her stepdad, and I just told them the truth, and Tracy and I had a conversation. All my friends were telling me, well, see if she'll have an abortion, and you don't want to get married this young, and blah blah blah. And I just kind of tuned all that out, and me and her talked, and we decided that we were going to have this baby and that we were going to get married. And so we ended up having this great big wedding. Her mom wanted to throw her proper wedding, and so we got married, and we stayed with my parents for about 3 months. And she was pregnant, and we got this little furnished apartment next to Plantation Golf Course. I think the apartments are still there. And I was working at Artist Metals in Garden City. Wasn't making very much money, but it was enough to pay rent. And all this time we're still, well, at least I was still smoking weed and drinking, and she took a break off all that while she was pregnant. And had my first daughter, Candace, and then I got a job out in Caldwell at Kit Manufacturing, making seat cabinets for RV trailers. And so eventually we moved out there because it was just too much to drive there. And we lived in Caldwell for, I don't know, a year or so. And moved back to Boise, and then I was still working at Kit, right? I was carpooling with this kid, and we started, we were still smoking weed, and then all our friends would always come to us and, hey, can you get us some weed? Can you get us some weed? And we started selling it, and pretty soon we were selling a lot of it, and like enough to pay rent and everything. So I quit my job, and we were just doing that full time, and like, I'm not going to lie, it was fun. Like, the party lifestyle, and it wasn't good for our relationship though. And then, after a while we started getting into, methamphetamines, and that was really bad. We were fighting all the time, and the kids were around it. They were really small back then, but still, they never really knew what was going on. but it wasn't good. And then, let's see. It was during that time that that I was trading stuff, and you know, I had traded a bunch of drugs for this motorcycle, and there was a couple nights that we took LSD, and this was like no LSD that I had ever done before, because I'd done it a few times and I didn't see any hallucinations or anything like that, but it really messed my head up the second time I took it. And I went off by myself, and I don't know how much of this I want to share, but so at the time we knew some people that were in a local motorcycle club, and I always thought that's what I wanted to be, you know, was this big tough biker. And so I went up to this club and was going to fight him, you know, and there was nobody there except for one guy, and he came out and we had a little altercation, nothing physical. I wanted to see the president of the club, and he's like, he's not even here, dude. Just go home. Cause he could tell I was on something. And so I left, and then I came back and I'm pounding on the door, and then I hear something behind me, and this guy's standing there with a gun pointing at me. And he's like, you need to leave right now. And I slapped the gun out of his hand, and he just looked at me and he was like, dude, what are you on? And anyway, I left there, and like I said, I didn't really have any hallucinations, like visual ones, but all these different scenarios and things were going through my head, and I remember pulling into this parking lot off of Roosevelt, and I just revved that stolen motorcycle. I just revved it up really hard and like threw it on the ground. And I remember wandering around out in the streets, and a car pulled up, and I was saying stuff to them. And then I looked over at this gas station that was right there, and there was a cop sitting there. And I went over there and basically kind of turned myself in. I don't know what I was doing. Like, I said, you better arrest me right now before I do something really stupid. And then I told him I was on a stolen motorcycle, and he put me in his car. And then I got mad because I was in the police car, and they drove over to where the motorcycle was. And for whatever reason, he let me out for a minute. Maybe, I don't know why, but I remember getting violent with him, and they shackled me and shackled my feet and hooked those together and threw me in the cop car like a suitcase. And I went to jail, and they threw me in I know when they pulled me out of the cop car when I first got there, I was spitting on them, and like I was just out of my mind. And I still don't understand all of that and what I was actually going through, but that was kind of I don't know, that was a bad time. And my wife did not understand what I was going through. And I ended up doing, after all the court processes and everything, I ended up doing 90 days in the Ada County Jail, and got out on probation, and got a job at another trailer factory in Boise, and was going to try and fly right, and we still had all the same friends. And I remember finding some meth in my wife's purse, and I thought she wasn't doing it anymore. And I'm like, what are you doing? I'm on probation. They can come in this house anytime. And she's like, this is how I've been paying rent while you've been locked up, and she was still making lots of money, and it was, I just gave in. I'm like, all right, well, let's do it then. And we were still fighting a lot, and we just kind of grew apart, and we ended up separating for a while. And there was so much drama and fighting, and so much so that my mom stepped in and she said, I'm taking these kids from you because they don't need to be around all this. And trying to get my timelines right, but I know I got another charge. This was after we had separated, and I got another charge for possession of cocaine. And I guess I should mention this. It was shortly after we split up that I started using drugs intravenously. And I had always told myself I would never do that. The crowd that we were in, we looked down on those kind of people. They were the junkies. And I just had this I don't care attitude, and so got another possession charge. Ended up doing 6 months in Cottonwood, going through their boot camp program. I don't know what it's like these days, but when I went, it was very regimented. You marched and that's where I got my GED. So if you didn't have a high school diploma, you went to school and you got your GED. And then they had a very intensive recovery program, and I barely slid through that. In fact, they told me I wasn't going to graduate that, and then at the last minute, they pushed me through, I guess. And I got out. I was living with this other gal, and I had all these outpatient programs and stuff I was supposed to do, and I couldn't complete any of them, and I ended up just kind of absconding from my probation, and was still doing, like, my main focus in life back then was just, okay, how am I going to get high today? And my childhood friend from high school, Mark, he had moved to Nevada, and I hadn't seen him for a long time, and he just kind of showed up out of the blue, and he's like, well, what's going on? What are you doing? And I'm like, well, not much, and he's like, well, come hang out with me for a while. And so I went they were living in Vegas, and I went to Vegas, and so by this time, Mark he's been kind of sick all his life. He got Hodgkin's disease when he was a teenager, and then he had, I don't know if, he said he thought it was because he started drinking real heavy, but he got a a hole or a stricture in his esophagus, and it had pretty much just closed up. And so he was on like a liquid diet, and he would get really weak at times, and he was just skin and bones. And a lot of times he had to wear a neck brace to hold his head up. And he's like, well, you can come to Vegas and help me, And so he had a son that was living with him, and I would take his son to school, and I tried to earn my keep around there and try and keep the house clean. And he was living with his mom, and his mom was working full time. And so I lived down there for like a year and a half. And, and then they made the decision to move back to Idaho. So we packed up their whole house, and this whole time I was, using every day, very minimal sleep. I think I might have weighed 160 pounds back then, just very, very unhealthy. And I had absconded from my probation here. So I tried not to ever drive or just get in any kind of situation to where the cops could get my ID or anything. And, so we had a person lined up to drive one of the vehicles. So we had a big U-Haul, we had Mark's truck, and then his mom's van. And the guy that was supposed to drive didn't show up, so I ended up driving. And we stopped for breakfast that day that we left. And I told his mom, I'm like, I got a really bad feeling about today. I don't know. I should not be driving. And I said, I'm going to drive, but, and so, sure enough, we're going through the Nevada desert, way out in the middle of nowhere, and got pulled over. And I had a fake ID, but I didn't give it to him, but I tried to remember all the social security number and everything, and it didn't work. And here I am in his mom's van, and there's all the stuff to cook meth tucked away under the bed behind, in the van. I've got his son in the passenger seat, and Mark had pulled over too. And I just remember, trying to give that information, and he went back to his car, and then he came back up to the window with guns drawn. And he's telling his partner, we got a felony hit. And he's telling me, don't move. And his hands are shaking, and he's got the gun pointed right at me. And I'm like, I'm not going to move. I'm not going to move. And so they got us out of the vehicles and set us on the side of the road, and I'm handcuffed. And I felt this huge sense of relief, because I'd been so scared of getting caught or going to jail, that day I knew I was going to jail, but I just felt a sense of relief, because I was in such bad shape. And in fact, I had been up for the previous 3 days, and I was fighting to stay awake at the wheel, and so I went to this little county jail, Lincoln County Jail in Pioche, Nevada. And I think I slept for a solid week. I would wake up and eat and go right back to sleep. And Mark ended up bailing out and going back to Idaho. And his mom said, I can bail you out too if you want. And I said, just let me face what's in front of me. I'm fine. I need to get this behind me. And so I stayed in the county jail. By the time I got sentenced, I think I'd been in there for about 8 months. And probation and parole there, I had an interview with them, and they said, they did their deal, and they said, well, the judge usually goes by our recommendation. We're going to recommend 13 months in prison, but you'll get time served. So I'm like, well, cool. That doesn't sound too bad. So I went to my sentencing, and the judge, I never forget this. The judge, he said, well, I usually go by P&P's recommendation, but I don't think that's near enough for you, Mr. Crist, and named off his reasons. He said, so I'm going to sentence you to 6 years in prison. And my heart just dropped. Like, how am I going to do 6 years? Well, in Nevada, they have a minimum and a maximum. And I think the minimum amount of time that I would have to do before I was eligible for parole was 28 months. And so they shipped me off to Indian Springs, which is a maximum security prison. And this was a big prison. And it was culture shock for me, because I grew up in Eagle, Idaho, and while I was there, I saw like a riot between the Hispanics and the black people, and like it was scary. So the whole time I was there, I just kept to myself, and I started reading a lot of books, and but then when you get to a certain point, and if you qualify, that they send you to these minimum security fire camps. So if you're in good enough physical shape, you can qualify to be on a fire crew. And if, when it's not fire season or whatever, you just do different jobs in the community. The first camp that I was in, we just went out to this big place where they had bulldozed all these trees down, and we, with chainsaws, we just cut up firewood and then they supplied a few of the campgrounds. And so I was in that camp for about 6 months, I think. And they made the determination that it was too close to where I got arrested. So they shipped me to one in Winnemucca, and they put me on a crew, and the crew boss was just... Anyway, I didn't want to go out on that crew, and they said, well, that's a refusal to work. And I'm like, I'll go out on any other crew, but, this guy's... I don't know. So I didn't go out on any crews after that. And I was this was their discipline for me. And they ended up shipping me to the Carlin camp, which was just outside of Elko. And that was their disciplinary camp. And that ended up being the best camp I'd been to. They had better weights. The crew I got on was awesome. The last 6 months that I was there, I got a job in the kitchen, and so I could pretty much eat whatever I wanted, and I started working out and getting healthy and running. And when I finally, so I did flop my first parole hearing, and then I ended up doing a total of 35 months in Nevada's correctional system. So when I got out, I was in really good shape. I paroled back to Idaho. My parents let me stay there. And um, did everything they told me to, and I had a cousin that was that worked for a contractor here in Boise, and got a job right away doing concrete. And I'm still doing concrete, not for that same company, but so I worked for them for about 4 years. During that time, I made some friends in the company and started hanging out with different people, and that's where I met my second wife. And we got married right away, pretty much. I think I had only been dating her with her for less than a year, and moved in with her, and ended up quitting that company and going to another concrete contractor. And it was during that time that, so right when I got off parole, I just started drinking again. I never stuck a needle in back in my arm. I never did any hard drugs or anything. I think I smoked weed once in a while, but pretty much doing what every other construction worker does is we go to work and work real hard and then drink real hard, And during that time, so I was married to this gal for about 7 years. Towards the end of that, I started experiencing some pretty significant panic and anxiety, having these panic attacks. And I made the decision to quit drinking. And the panic attacks got worse. And that's when I that's when I went to AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. And that whole time was kind of blurry to me, but it got so bad that I didn't know what to do, and so I sought medical help, and they put me on some anti-anxiety pills or whatever, and they helped a little bit, but I just kept having these panic attacks, and it seemed to be all wrapped around, like I was so afraid to make a mistake at work. I'd been promoted to a foreman, running these crews, and I remember going to my bosses twice and just telling them, "Hey, I can't do this job. I don't want to be a boss anymore." And they just didn't understand. They're like, "You are perfectly capable of doing this job. We don't understand what's going on." And I said, "Well, I don't either, but So long story short, I found myself out in my garage one morning, and I had already started my truck. I was supposed to be on this job at a certain time, and my phone was blowing up because I was supposed to be there an hour ago, and I was so full of fear and anxiety that I just wanted to kill myself. And I don't even know. I had a knife in my hand, but I didn't want to cut myself because I didn't want anybody to have to clean up the blood. My mind was just racing so bad. And I had already gone to Intermountain Hospital once before this day, and seemed to get a little relief. But and I think it was after that we got medical help and I got put on these pills and everything. And I remember my wife came out and she had thought I had already left for work, but evidently she might have heard my truck running or whatever. And she came out in the garage and I was just pacing. She's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "I don't know." And she saw the knife in my hand. She goes, "I'm taking you back to the hospital." And I'm like, "Okay." I didn't know. I was just lost. And so went in the house and she's getting all her stuff ready. And she's like, "Make sure you bring your pills." And I'm like, "Okay." And got the pills out of my cupboard and I looked at those pills and I had just got them refilled the day before. And it just hit me. I'm like, here's the answer right here. And I opened that pill bottle and I swallowed that whole bottle of pills. And I just remember after I swallowed those, I smiled. And I just thought, I don't have to feel like this anymore. And got in the car and she took me down to, I think we went across the street to St. Al's mental health place instead of Intermountain. And she was up at the counter and I was just sitting in the waiting room and she said, "Hey, you need to sign this paper." And I stood up and I went, "Oh, I'm really high right now." And I remember walking up to the counter and that's all I remember. And I woke up, I want to say 3 or 4 days later, and I was back in Intermountain Hospital and found out later that they had taken me to St. Al's hospital and pumped my stomach and evidently I had conversations with my daughter and like all this stuff and I don't remember any of it. And so evidently, so I had to actually go to court because evidently I had threatened my wife's life, which I don't remember. And this was like I want to say it was kind of like a competency hearing type thing, to see what they're going to do with this crazy guy, And they diagnosed me with severe depression and I was bipolar. And I still feel some of that a little bit, but they were going to send me to the state hospital. And then they offered me, we have an in-house recovery program that is, I want to say it was a 30 or 60 day program. And we'd rather see you do that than go to a state hospital. And so towards the end of that program, I was going to get out. And I wasn't ready to face the world yet. And so I said all the right things. And I knew what to say to where they would have to keep me, voices in my head or whatever. I can't remember exactly what I said, but so I ended up going to the state hospital in Orfino, I think. And I remember before when I was just at Intermountain Hospital, my wife came in and she didn't know I saw her, but she was going up to sign the papers to come visit me, and she just had this really irritated look on her face. And we had been fighting, and there was some resentment there because I was really trying to help my oldest daughter at the time. She was going through her own legal stuff, and she ended up doing drug court and graduating that. But I had been like, I spent some money on her fines, and all this created some resentment. And so that day that she came to visit me, my wife, we're sitting there, just me and her, and neither one of us knew what to say. And I said, I hate that we can't even talk. And I said, I don't know if it's, this deal with my daughter or what's going on, but I just fell out of love with you. And she just looked at me with this blank expression. She goes, well, I guess we both know what to do. And she walked out. And I didn't talk. She never tried to call me or contact me that whole time that I was in the recovery program or went to state hospital. And when I got out, I had divorce papers waiting for me. And, that time up in the state hospital, I got a lot of clinical information about my condition, but there was no spiritual help. And I'm going to pause and take a drink. I learned all about depression and being bipolar and the symptoms and how to manage, and but something was missing. And so I moved back in with my parents. My parents always welcomed me into their home. That was my refuge. And I didn't want to drink or use, and because I knew that wouldn't do my life or myself any good. So I just started going back to AA. And was the way my sponsor and the group that I was in was very big on service. That's what we do to keep sober, is we serve. We chair meetings, we do what we can. And so I got big into service, and so my wife right now, Gigi, that's where I met her. And I was around her for years before we ever really had any interest in each other. I mean, she was with another guy at the time, and I wasn't fit to be with anybody, but I remember I think it was during that time. This was probably around 2007, 2009, somewhere in there. My oldest daughter, would come to AA meetings once in a while, and then she invited me to church. And one of her friends had invited her, and she said, "Dad, you gotta come check out this church, this little church. It's they have really good music." And so my whole reason of going to church for the first time, because I remember maybe going to church one or two times on like Easter or something when I was a kid, but my family we weren't churchgoers. And so I went to church with her, and the music was really good. In fact, I don't know if you listen to Christian music much, but Ryan Stevenson was the worship leader at the time, and now he lives in Nashville, and he's done concerts with Toby Mac and all this stuff. But I went to that church, and I just started hearing the truth, God's truth. And my daughter did too. And we would cry during the songs, and then we'd cry during, certain sermons because it was just hitting us so hard. And we both ended up getting baptized on the same day. And I don't remember the date or anything, but it was still kind of the same culture. Like, okay, we're part of the church. Let's serve. What can I do to serve? And so I helped a couple of the other guys. We were working with the young boys and doing little Bible classes and stuff. And it was shortly after I started going to church, I think, when Gigi and I kind of got together. She was single, and I had recently gotten another motorcycle. I bought it this time, but just asked her if she wanted to go for a ride, and we started hanging out just, as friends. I didn't really know where it was going, but we ended up starting dating, and then we weren't dating very long, and I ended up moving in with her. And she didn't go to church at first with me. I would get up and get dressed and go to church, and I never pushed it or anything. And then she came to the decision herself to start going with me, and it was good. And then we were both serving, and her son was serving, and I felt like God was moving in my life, and Gigi and I lived together for, I think, about 3 years. And I ended up leaving her because of my selfishness, and she wouldn't conform to my expectations, and that's my character defect. But so I made some lame excuse to break up with her. But I remember, I feel like the first time God ever really spoke to me was, I was by myself in my car, just talking to God and praying, and like, why is my life like this? And why is there so much drama? And why won't she do what I think she should do? And it wasn't like an audible voice or anything. I just felt like God spoke to me in that moment, and he said, "You have to give me everything." And that scared me. Like, I don't even know what that means. I don't know how to do that. And so it was shortly after that. Well, we actually had a meeting with our pastor, and I'm complaining about all these things that she needs to do. And the pastor didn't even address any of that. And he came out of the 12-step recovery AA world too. And he said, "Well, you need to do a 4-step." I'm like, "Me? Why do I need to do anything?" And that was just my unwillingness to take an honest look at myself and see what was wrong with me. Not it's none of my business what's wrong with her, So I broke up and moved out of her house in one afternoon, and went back to my mom's house and lived with her. And Gigi and I tried to get back together a couple times, and it was just, it was all me, you know. But I remember our pastor offered her a job at the church because she had to, I was helping with the bills, and now I wasn't there, so she had to work. And and I know she shared this too, but you know, he said, you're employed by the church now, so you have to walk accordingly, and you can't be sleeping with Doug, and you can't be, you know. And she told me all this, and I'm like, I'm out. I'm done. And all it took was one conversation with my mom. And she made this comment. She said, because we were talking about my past and drinking and drugging, and she said, well, I never really thought you were a true alcoholic. And I was like, well, maybe I'm not. Maybe I can drink. And so I started drinking again. And the house right next to my parents came up for rent. And so I rented the house right next to my mom's. And I was working. During that drinking bout, I was very functional and could hold a job. But that's all I did was I worked and I drank. And for about 2 years. And it was not good for my soul. I quit going to church. I tried going to a couple different churches because I didn't want to go back to the church that Gigi was, you know, that me and Gigi went to. And and so I just quit praying. I quit going to church, and I just drank, and I was miserable. I was slipping back into depression. I never really got any other thoughts of suicide or anything like that, but I was pretty sad. And it was at my youngest daughter, Melissa's birthday. I think she was 39 at the time. She had a birthday party at her in-laws, which was way out on McDermott, and they had a little bit of land out back, and they had this little oval dirt track, and there was a couple little mini bikes, and the kids were riding those, and somebody had a four-wheeler, and there was this one dirt bike that was I think it was a 250 or something, but I hopped on that and was riding around. And I remember when I went out there that day, I had 2 beers, and I took my dog with me, and I had a plan. I was only going to drink those 2 beers, and then because I wanted to be able to drive home, and and that plan went right out the window. We started doing shots, and I smoked some weed, and towards the end of the night, it was just before dark, and I got back on that dirt bike, and I did a couple laps, and I was fine, and I found out later, like, nobody thought I was really that wasted or anything, but I remember stopping, and the guy that owned the property, he said, well, it's starting to get dark, we should probably get everything put away, and the kids and everything, and I'm like, okay. And that was all I remember. I guess I took off and immediately wrecked, and they had to call an ambulance, and I shattered my right foot, had to have 3 operations on this foot. I fractured 4 ribs, fractured my shoulder blade, peeled this finger back. I don't remember any of it. And woke up in the hospital, hungry and thirsty, and they wouldn't give me even water because they didn't know if I was gonna have to go right into surgery, and ended up spending 10 days in the hospital. Like I said, 3 operations on this foot. And, I was like, okay, I need to just stop doing anything, because I'm either going to end up back in prison or I'm going to kill myself or somebody else, you know. So I found out later, I don't know, I found out later that that same week, Gigi had been praying for me this whole time, you know. I still loved her and she still loved me, but I wouldn't let myself admit that to myself. But that same week, she asked God to get my attention, with the caveat, don't hurt him too bad. When she told me that later, I was like, but so I was off this foot. I couldn't work for 6 months. And thank God my employer let me draw unemployment during that time. And so my bills were getting paid. You know, Gigi and I told her, I said, don't call me, don't text me, don't, you know, we're done. Well, I didn't say anything about email. So she sent me an email, and very well worded email. And she said, I just wanted to thank you for taking us to your church, because that's where her oldest son, Tyler, had met his wife. And when she wrote this email, they had just got married. And I was like, this woman is amazing. And so I think I don't know if I emailed her back or just sent her a text, but my heart just softened that day. And I realized what a butthole I'd been. And I kind of offhandedly mentioned the accident, and I think I kind of assumed that maybe she knew, but she was like, what accident? And I told her, and she was like, well, do you need anything? And so I let her back in, you know, and she took me to doctor's appointments and helped me with pretty much whatever I needed. And both of us didn't know if this would ever lead to anything or whatever. And I remember writing her a letter. It probably took me a week to write this letter, and I was praying a lot on how to write it. And basically it just said, you know, I am so sorry for how I treated you. I can't believe that you even want to be my friend at all. And I said, but I trust you and I trust God. And I feel like God will lead us in a way that's the right way. And I bought her a little gift, and and I took it to her house the day that my oldest daughter got married. And she told me later that she was really afraid to open that letter because she didn't know what it was going to say. And after she did, we had a good conversation about what the future looked like. and she said, yes, I do want to be with you, but things have got to be different. And we both agreed to that. And I don't even know if we even really talked about it, but I think we both knew that if we were going to date for a while or be together for a while, that sex was off the table. We were going to honor God, and it was just a mutual thing. And I think we dated for almost a year before I proposed, and we got married in that same church that she was working at, and God has always called us. He always seems to have called us into either the recovery ministry or I remember leading a couple Bible studies with her. We just kind of went wherever God led us, and let's see. She left that church and then went to Love Inc., and that's where I met you guys.
Yeah.
And I volunteered at Love Inc. and did my thing there, teaching a budgeting class, and pretty much did whatever they needed me to do there. And I don't know. I just helping others and serving others is just, it kind of comes natural, I guess. Maybe as the way I was raised, and especially raised in AA, that was just ingrained in us, that you serve. And kind of stuck here, Brenton.
What comes to mind for me is just before this, we were talking about my last guest, Parker, and he went through a couple really traumatic things. Like, he was in Vegas for the Vegas shooting, and he served 5 years in the Marines and had some PTSD and stuff. But what he came back to is like, it's not about us, it's about others.
Yeah.
And I've done a fair amount of reading and watched a lot of podcasts and other things. And one of the things that stuck out to me is there's not much difference between being miserable and being focused on yourself. Yeah. So when you can focus your attention and everything outwards and focus on others, you stop being as miserable. So I'm kind of seeing a lot of parallels there where I think you were picking up on, hey, my life seems to go better. I'm not as miserable when I'm focused on other people, helping them.
Yeah, that is so true. And it's funny because just this week, even aside from our conversation yesterday, I heard that same concept I listened to a lot of sermons, and God kind of put that desire in me shortly after Gigi and I decided to try and make it work. She sent me a couple sermons from Francis Chan, and listening to him and his heart for God really opened my heart to like who God really is and how much he loves us. And it says over and over, deny yourself, bear with one another, serve one another, love one another, and it's true. When we do that, when we're other focused, your little problems and dramas don't seem so big.
Yeah.
So
I always kind of had a philosophy growing up. I love discussing theology. I love talking philosophy. I love all of that, but I always kind of separate it down to something. I kind of said it's not a salvation issue to me. Like there's two things, love God and love others. And you can basically sum everything else up in that.
Yeah.
And so it's fun to dive in. It's fun to talk the theology. But like if you and I disagree on something, as far as I'm concerned, like most of that's not going to be a salvation issue. We can have different beliefs, like whether, like as an extreme example, whether you believe hell exists or not, that shouldn't change how I act, how I love people, how I love God. Like that's not a salvation issue to me. It does not change how I should act in my beliefs. So it's like I try to operate in that love God and love others, and that's everything.
Yeah. So I guess after Gigi left Love Inc., well, it's kind of funny. So funny in how God works. You feel like he's not working, but he always is, you know. And about the time that there were some things happening at Love Inc. that I don't know how to describe it. So Gigi was just feeling like maybe it was time to go somewhere else, and we had started going to Rockharbor, and we had always, you know, talked about, well, if they ever start any kind of, you know, 12-step thing or recovery thing, you know, that would be awesome. And so when they announced that they were going to do this regeneration 12-step program, Gigi was really excited. She's like, finally, let's go. They want people that want to be leaders to go through this pilot program. And then she's like, let's do it. And I'm like, okay. So this is selfishness on my part, you know, because I think about something like that and it's like, okay, my work's pretty demanding. Sometimes I'm working 60 hours a week or more. When am I going to have time to do this, you know? But so reluctantly I agreed, you know. And another thing in my head, it's like, well, you know, they want us to go through the program. I've been sober for a long time, you know. I don't have much to work on. Well, I had no idea what God was going to show me. And so we started doing this pilot program, and we just went through the 12 steps, just like any other person would today, you know. And God showed me real quick what my sin is, you know, my sins. In regeneration, we say sin struggles, you know, but really they're just, what are the things we're putting before God? You know, what are my idols? And it was during that, going through that pilot program, that I had to get really, really honest. And I'm still an alcoholic. I'm still an addict, you know, and I still have those tendencies in me. And about halfway through that pilot program, I had to confess to my group of men that I had been sneaking my son's psych meds because they help me sleep. You know, and I had been hiding that from my wife, and you know, as an addict, I can find all kinds of ways to justify my actions. You know, but that was very, very humbling to have to tell that group of guys that, and then it was super scary confessing that to Gigi, and God bless her. That confession was met with grace and compassion, and her very good understanding of the person that had to confess that to her. She knows me so well, and you know, I confessed it, I repented, and those are the tools that I use today. You know, to where I don't have to feel condemned, and I don't have to carry guilt and shame. Yeah, I wish I wouldn't have done that, but I don't have to carry that, And so we went through the pilot program, and the day that we launched Regen to the church, me and this other gal got up on stage and gave a very condensed, short testimony, and that was so scary. Like getting up on that stage, and I don't know, there was probably 30 or 40 people in the room, in the auditorium there. But I'll tell you what, leading that first group of participants was life-changing for me. I just felt this overwhelming, okay, this is where God wants you. This is your purpose right now, and I went through the 12 steps with the pilot program. I went through the 12 steps with that first group, and every group that I led since then, I go through the steps, I go through the curriculum with them, and every single time God shows me either something new or something I've been fighting for a long time. Because I'm human, I'm a sinner. And so I don't know. I just feel like I'm right where God wants me to be right now. And so I have led, so counting the pilot program, I've been through that 12-step program 5 times now. And I got the privilege just this last Thursday so they have a first timers meeting. So at Regeneration, we have some 2 or 3 worship songs, either a testimony or a short sermon after that. And then anybody that's brand new and wants to learn more about Regen, they have a first timers meeting right there in the auditorium. And kind of last minute, they're like, hey, can you do this first timers meeting? Because we don't have anybody else. And I'm like, yeah, I can do it. And so I sat in a group with about 10 guys, and we give them a struggle sheet, and it has about 100 different things on there, lust, pride, anger, frustration, all these different things that you might struggle with. And, I'm still underlining a bunch of them on that list, but I tell them about Regen and how it works. And then I ask them some questions, and then the women go with the women, and the men sit in a circle with the men, and we just answer those questions, and it was so solidifying for me to sit in that group and just listen to their struggles, and their hope, some of them, just their hopelessness of ever getting out of that, and then I finished with that, and it went really well. I think every single person in that circle went out and bought a book and planned to come back. But I had enough time to go sit with my group that is graduating or commencing next week and just watch like it's night and day, to sit in a circle with guys that just went through that program, and everybody's laughing and having, it's like, we don't want this to end, and let's get together again, and let's do barbecues, and just the fellowship and the way God heals through that process.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. Just amazing.
How do you get people to share their stories? Because I think that's one of the big challenges is everybody's so ashamed and they don't want to bear it. I know several people that have, like, I'll frame it in the podcast, that have amazing stories that could share and give hope to so many people, or share and be like, okay, you're not the only one struggling with this. There's others of us that have these struggles, and you don't have to feel as much shame when you know that you're not alone.
Yeah.
But they're afraid people are going to look at them different. They're afraid it just says, they're not a good person. Like, all that shame stops them from sharing or interacting. How do you help them past that?
So I think that first timers meeting helps because, like, a couple of the questions are, okay, name your top 3 struggles that you checked off on that list, that struggle sheet. And then out of those 3, pick the top one, or, maybe the most important one, or the one that causes you most grief, or whatever. What's your top one? And then what would your life look like if that was removed or healed from your life? And we have them do it on a little note card. And I filled that out too myself. And I think, so I set the example, and I feel like we have a lot of good groundwork. So when you come back, you go to groundwork. And if you have a good leader that is willing to be vulnerable and transparent, that's going to set the example. And I was amazed Thursday night how fast everybody kind of, okay, it's okay. This is a safe place, And, every time we went around and answered those questions, like, I could visibly see people relax, because you do realize I'm not the only one struggling with this, and there was one person in particular that just confessed that he has some pretty significant sexual sin in his life. And after he said that, like, everybody started, just opening up like that. And I think between that and the Holy Spirit being present, like, I truly believe that God has his hand on every aspect of that program. I see him working in huge ways. One of the, I guess, one of the one that gives me so much joy and hope was this guy in one of the groups I was leading. He's older gentleman, older than me, lost his wife to cancer, and was like ready to end it. Just, I have no reason to live. Life sucks. I'm just going to kill myself. And whether this was a last ditch effort to do something or what, but like, the change I saw in that man from the beginning to when we commenced, and now he's serving in different areas in the church, and like, he's always got a smile on his face, and like, he's just full of joy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, nobody can do that but God,
Yeah.
So
I see a lot of benefit in serving others. Have you heard of Mark Rennick?
Yeah.
So Mark's one of the guests that I had on, and like, that's one of the ways he's gotten past stuff is he's giving back. He's helping.
Yeah.
Like, we're all people, and the less isolated we feel, the more we're able to overcome. Like, leading by example is huge, but a lot of people aren't willing to do that. So how do you inculcate that in other people, get more people to share and lead by that same example, so that it keeps, I view it kind of like a ripple in a pond. How do you have that ripple effect where those people can influence more? And
So I know in Regen, especially the last, so especially in step 12, the curriculum that they're in, and I try to influence a lot too, is all about, okay, now we've removed all these things that stood between me and God. You know, we're right with God. We've done all this work to reconcile with all the people in our lives, you know, through forgiveness and amends. And so now what are we going to do with all these things, you know? And step 12 is the step of reconciliation. Okay, so they give very clear steps on how to share the gospel with people. They make you list, or they ask you to list, you know, like 10 people in your life that maybe don't know God that you could approach, and they show you how to do that. And then I always just tell my own testimony of, you know, my reluctance to be a part of Regen, and then God showing me how awesome it is and what a blessing it is when I do pour into other people. And then I try to encourage them, you know, because what I've run into, well, you know, I don't think I could ever lead, you know, I'm just not that kind of person. I'm like, well, you've been through the program, right? Well, yeah. I said, well, you see this piece of paper that me and your leader always read off of, this script? I said, you can read, right? Well, yeah. And I said, that's all you got to have. That's the only qualification, you know, that and a willingness to help somebody. And like, so I just call her my daughter, but she's my second wife's daughter. She went through the program. My oldest daughter, she would always call me and complain about this and complain about that, and I'm like, well, you know, Regen will help you. And I pounded that into her for 2 years before she finally made the decision to come to Regen. And now she's leading groundwork. And, you know, I just see this program helping so many people. Like anybody that gives it any kind of effort at all and sticks with the program, you're not going to come out the same.
Yeah.
You know? In fact, we have Regen shirts that say, never be the same. So
that's awesome. I'm curious how you interface with other organizations. Like if you talk about serving others, is it back just like in regeneration, or kind of like Parker's doing, go volunteer at a food bank, or like how do you get people focused a little more on others?
Yeah. So as far as me personally, like I said, my job is pretty demanding. I'm 60 hours a week a lot of times, but Regen is that's my ministry. And, you know, that ministry has grown so much just, I think, from word of mouth. Mm-hmm. And I have recommended it to several people at work. And but yeah, that's pretty much the only. That's pretty much that's my my lane right now, I guess.
Yeah.
So,
well, I wanted to pick your brain a little bit. My general philosophy is I don't look on the past with regrets, because I wouldn't be who I am if I hadn't gone through everything. Are there things I wish I would have done differently? Yeah, I would do things differently now, but I also wouldn't have learned that if I didn't go through it. So I tend to not live in the past. But Right, I'm curious, like, if you could go talk to your younger self, what would you tell yourself?
Well, that's a tough question, Brenton. I've always thought I never denied the existence of God. I always like evolution and all that just didn't make sense to me. I always knew there was something. If I was to say one thing to my younger self would be seek God, find out who God is, And I think that's being a part of Rockharbor and being in such a big church. And maybe I'm way off base. I don't know. I don't know what everybody's mindset is, but I feel like the biggest problem with the church today is we have no idea who God is. Like if God can speak the world into existence, and if God says that he loves and cares for us, like, why wouldn't we want to be an integral part of that? I know it took me a long time to come to that realization. In fact, so one of the guys that attends Rockharbor, he started his own website and he sends out these devotionals every day. And I wish I could remember it. But it hit me hard today. It's like, do you mind if I pull this up for a quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think I don't want to misquote it, but it hit me so hard. Says the will of God trumps all of our personal agendas and ambitions. Like, all of them, I mean, I know my daughter, she even like just a year or so ago, she said, well, I don't know if I could ever be an all-in Christian like you and Gigi. And I'm like, well, is there any other kind? I just feel like so many people, myself included for a long time, just thought that it was more legalistic in nature, I guess. If I go to church and I do this service work and I try to love this guy that really bugs me or whatever, is that going to be enough? In fact, I remember in tears saying a prayer at our first church. I would go in there on Saturdays and nobody would be there, and I'd clean the bathrooms and clean the other parts of the building. And I just remember sitting in the sanctuary and just in tears praying. And I just said, God, I hope I'm doing enough. At that time, I thought that's what it was about, that I had to earn my keep, or earn my salvation or do all these things to please him. And honestly, it's just been in the last, 4 or 5 years that I've really been accepting the facts that are in the Bible and my identity based from what God says about me. God says crazy things about me. You are beloved. You are my son. You are redeemed. You are forgiven. All those things that I don't feel about myself. Okay, am I going to believe God or am I going to believe my feelings? you know, and you mentioned regret. I feel like that's one of the enemy's sharpest tools in his toolbox. Like if the enemy can get us to live lives of regret, then I'm stuck there, you know. If if I live a life of comparison, or I guess covetousness is the word, you know, if I'm always thinking, well, I wish I was like that person, or I wish I had those abilities, or whatever, that's another place that the enemy wants to keep us stuck.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, he can even use the future, like by telling us that you don't know enough to speak into that, or you don't, you know, there's no way you could have a career in ministry or do this, or, you know. And it's so subtle. And a lot of times I think these are my own thoughts, you know, but these are lies that the enemy plants in us and uses to his advantage. And because that's another thing I've realized in the last few years, is like we are in a spiritual battle. You know, the Bible says we are, and I'm starting to believe it, you know.
Are you familiar with Jordan Peterson?
Yes.
So
I haven't listened to him a lot, but I know who he is.
I listen to him a lot. He has a concept that I really appreciate. And I'm going to butcher it. I can't do it justice, but view God as, you know, that which is perfect truth, perfect everything, absolute. So one of the ways you can orient yourself is towards that perfect good. Like, we're human, we can't be perfect, right? Like, we're all flawed, but you should aim at that which is perfect. So if you think of God kind of as a target, like God is the bullseye of that target that you're aiming at. One of the things we do is, like, our perception, what we're perceiving, understanding, is actually something that we have capacity to adjust. If you are talking negative all the time, if you aim your view at negative, you're going to find nothing but negative.
Yeah.
If you aim it at positive, you're going to find those positive things. So our perception, our aim, all of that has to be adjusted and aimed. So choose your target, aim up, aim at God. And as we were talking about regret, this came to mind because regret is then aiming at something else. Yeah. If you're focused on that regret, you can't hit that mark. You're not even aiming in that direction. You're aiming off somewhere else.
Yeah.
So it maybe feels weird to talk about God as a target, right? But I like that mental model of aim up, aim at God, put your focus there. One of the definitions of sin originally came from archery, and that was to miss your target.
Yeah.
So when you're sinning, you're missing that mark. You're aiming off somewhere else. So the more, and if you don't have an aim, you can't hit a target you're not aiming at. Yeah. So set your aim, focus there, and keep going. So
I wasn't there when she did this, and I think she did this when my wife did, when she was at Love Inc. And she had one of those Velcro bullseyes and the little balls, you know, and she was talking about, you know, setting goals and hitting the target, and she kept throwing these balls behind her. The thing was behind her, and, you know, I forget how she worded it, but it was perfect. And she's like, how can I even try to, you know, hit the target if I'm not even facing it, you know? And so Yeah, I understand that concept. And actually, recently, I found myself. I don't know. I went through a period the last few months where I just wasn't sleeping very good. I'd wake up and I knew I wouldn't be able to go back to sleep, and I was running on like 3 or 4 hours of sleep every day, and I found myself just verbally saying, I'm so tired. I'm so tired. And that just made me more tired. And so I just quit saying that or thinking that. And it's like, okay, I can do this. I can make it through the day. I've got this stuff to do. And as soon as I started doing that, I started sleeping better.
Yeah.
That self-talk is so important.
It is. There's elements of that I hesitate to talk about because it almost sounds new agey or off or weird, but it's like, I think we can completely reframe that in a way, right? We were made in God's image. God spoke the world into existence. Like, there is power in words.
Yeah.
And we're made in God's image. One of my early guests, David Mark Brown, he's an author, views creativity as like one of those gifts from God. Like, we were meant to partake in creation with the creator. And so it's like, words have power and meaning. Choose your words carefully because you are literally speaking things into existence.
Yeah.
There is power in putting names to things. So if you wake up and the first thing you tell yourself is this is going to be a crap day, you've pretty much cemented it as a crap day. And if you wake up and say, this is going to be a beautiful day, there may be challenges that I face, but it's going to be a beautiful day in spite of that.
Yeah.
You are setting the foundation for that. You're literally speaking that into existence. And a lot of, secular stuff will talk about that as just manifest things into existence.
Yeah.
And I don't view that as quite right. I view that as an element of us being created in God's image, that those words do have power and meaning.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like, where did we lose the sayings that we had, 30, 40 years ago of, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all.
Yeah.
Like, we have all this wisdom that we're just throwing out. It's like, maybe there's actually something to that, because if you don't say nice things, speak that in, create that atmosphere.
Yeah.
There's another author that I follow a lot. Are you familiar with Dennis Prager?
Mm-mm.
So he had a radio show in California for like 30 years. He's Jewish, but he would have like a priest, a rabbi, a pastor, and him on, and just have different discussions and stuff. And after a lot of that, he wrote a book called Happiness is a Serious Problem. And he argues in it that happiness is a moral obligation because we have an effect on those around us. And so, like, thinking in terms of this, like what we're saying, what we're speaking, what we're creating around us, like, do we want to create a living hell on earth with negativity and just make everyone around us miserable? Or do we want to aim up? Let's create that positive atmosphere. You look at like the Holocaust, there were people that came out of that with nothing but positive, happy attitudes, joy.
How does that happen?
They went through more than anything we can imagine. But then you have people that have everything now that can do nothing but complain. Like, I believe happiness is a choice, and a choice that, I think we are morally obligated to pursue, because that does affect everyone around us.
Yeah. I can't. You said happiness is a choice. So one of the guys, I love this guy, and but he's one of those that just sees the wrong in every situation, like just very pessimistic,
Yeah.
And one day I'm working with him and he's all grumpy and everything. I'm like, happiness is a choice. And he's like, I don't want to hear that, and then he turned it right back on me one day. I was was having a bad day and was all frustrated, and everybody could tell. And he just put his arm around me and looked at me and goes, Doug, happiness is a choice. I'm like, okay, you got me. But yeah, I think, and I just had this kind of reminder discussion with my daughter, because she's a lot like me, and I just had to remind her, any situation we go into, and I'm still learning how to do this, but especially with your family and your spouse, and like, my worst enemy, I feel like sometimes, is my own expectations. I have expectations on how things should be, or how somebody should respond, but I have to remember that, my way isn't the best way, for one. And probably nobody else has the same thoughts and thought processes that I have. And like, what seems perfectly logical and right to me might not have entered their mind, So I just have to let whoever's in front of me be themselves, and not have too many expectations, because that's when I get angry. That's when I get frustrated. When my expectations aren't being met,
Yep.
And if I can just lower those, and just, I don't know, one of the best helps for me is to ask this question: in light of eternity, how important is this that's happening right here, right now? Like, I'm a redeemed, saved follower of Jesus. And I know where I'm going at the end of my life, or when he comes back. If one happens before the other, I know where I'm going.
Yeah.
In light of all that, like, the dishes didn't get done today. Is that such a big deal? In light of eternity, if I can try and frame everything around that, then nothing's too much of a big deal.
Yeah.
And I will say this as part of my story. So we've had a lot of loss in my family the last few years. The last several years. So my younger sister's daughter, Whitney, died at 26, about 7 or 8 years ago, I believe. She got a tumor up in her sinuses, and it turned into this brain cancer that spread all on her spinal column and her brain stem, and then about 2.5 years ago, my younger sister lost her husband to a sudden cardiac event. He was at work shoveling snow, and somebody found him laying in the snow. And then I want to say the very next year, on Valentine's Day, my older sister, came home from work and found her husband just laying in his recliner. Same thing, just a sudden heart attack or whatever. And then last June, my dad died. He was 87, so that wasn't a sudden loss, but still, And then this last March, my mom died. And I'll tell you what, if I wasn't where I am spiritually, I don't know, that probably all that would have, I don't know where I'd be without God in my life like he is today. In fact, like, we didn't really have anybody to do my older sister's husband's funeral, so I officiated. And then when my dad died, everybody's like, so you're going to do your dad's funeral too? And I'm like, okay. And I wasn't sure if I could do my mom's. Me and my mom were really, really close. Like, even when I was little, I was kind of scared of my dad, but I could tell my mom anything. And I didn't know if I could stand up there with, of course, we don't want to break down and start blubbering or crying, when you're up there talking about a loved one. But I ended up doing her funeral too, and with a measure of integrity. And there's no way I could have done that without everything that I've been through, everything that God has sanctified me in. Like, it was an honor to do that, to be able to do that, and I couldn't have done any of it without God.
Yeah.
So
I see Gigi as a kind of gift in that too, because that's part of what triggered her story was the depth of loss, right?
Yeah.
So, like, you can see two different paths on how to handle loss and how it really impacted her and how you were able to handle that and contrast that and have someone to lean on that's experienced that.
Yeah. Yeah. That woman has done more to teach me, and I've learned so much from that woman in how she interacts with broken people, just her wisdom in the recovery realm, and just her empathy. That woman has a lot of empathy, and me not so much, and some of that's rubbed off on me now. She's taught me how to see people in a way that that is helpful, to me and to whoever I'm trying to help or whatever. But God put us together for a reason, and I love doing ministry with her. Recently, kind of out of the blue, one of the guys that went through Regen, he's still very much involved in AA. He says, "Hey, I know this is short notice, but we're doing a speaker meeting. Can you be the speaker?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'll do that." And I had been to one of the meetings that he chairs earlier, I don't know, 6 or 8 months earlier. And there was like 8 or 10 people there, and I'm like, yeah, I can go sit and tell my story to a few people. So I didn't know they were having a chili feed afterwards, and like it was standing room only. There was probably 60 people in this room. But God was present, and I just told my story. And after that, Gigi and I both agreed. It's like, we need to at least be some small presence in this world of recovery again. So we committed to going to a meeting once a week and just see what God does in there,
Yeah.
Not that we're some wise AA gurus or anything, but we've kind of adopted that mentality. No good at quoting verses or knowing exactly where they are, but it was either, I don't know, God put out the question, who shall I send? And one of the prophets said, "Here I am, Lord, send me."
Yeah.
So we've kind of adopted that. Okay, whatever you got for us, God, send us. We're your servants.
I see things through maybe a bit of an interesting lens here in that, like, one of my long-standing philosophies is we are the average of the 5 people we choose to put ourselves around the most. And that could be whether it's your spouse, a close friend, or maybe you consume endless amounts of a certain author's work. Like it's those 5 people that you put yourself most in orbit around.
Yeah.
And that means that people really need good influences in their life. And so by you and Gigi putting yourselves in people's orbits, they're able to learn the lessons you guys went through. Yeah. They're able to become more like you. I don't know any of the 12-step program. I haven't been around that world at all. But one of the things I see is from watching a lot of podcasts, or that I've learned in other ways, is when it comes to addiction, one of the biggest things you have to change is your circle of influence and your environment. Yeah. If you go back to the same circle of influence or the same environment, it's all but guaranteed you're going to struggle again. And I don't want to say it's completely guaranteed, but you're putting yourself back in those same circumstances.
Yeah.
Like change those that you're staying in that circle of influence and change that environment.
Yeah. Well, and one of my sisters, she's like, man, you guys are always so busy and you're always doing all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, because it keeps my head on straight, and I love doing these things. I can feel it when I miss church on Sunday, I don't miss Thursday nights at Regen unless I absolutely have to, because I love it. I love what I do, and I need to keep myself plugged in.
Yeah. We've started volunteering in small ways, and it's like, I don't know anybody out there that loves changing diapers. Like, it's just not I don't know that that's a ministry someone's called to.
Yeah.
But we are serving in the nursery now. We're volunteering, and we started volunteering with the kids too. So it's like, we're volunteering in both areas. And, I love the sermons and everything, but we come home feeling more fulfilled, happier, more like we've had an impact and a difference on those Sundays that we're with the kids or in the nursery.
Yeah.
And not to say, like I said, hey, I feel more fulfilled because I changed the diaper.
Yeah.
No. But it's like, Kate, you're having an impact on these kids. You're able to share that positivity. Maybe, like, people don't realize it, but every interaction, whether you mean to or not, you're mentoring someone. Like, they are watching you. They are learning from you.
Yeah.
That's the nature of kids' play, is they're practicing and mimicking things that they've seen to work out their own mode of being.
Yeah.
So you get to go and interact and have a positive impact and do something meaningful.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Whereas sometimes, like I said, I like the sermons, but sometimes it's like, okay, now I'm going to church for me. What am I going to get out of this instead of what can I go and give?
Yeah.
It feels completely different to me.
Yeah. Well, and that's just it. I feel like we're in such a consumeristic age right now. Like that's what church has turned into for a lot of people. It's like, okay, is the music the way I like it? Is this a big church, small church? I don't like big churches. Just like all this checklist instead of, okay, do these guys teach right out of the Bible? Do these people seem like they care about the people that they're preaching to? Yeah.
I think too many people get caught up in the denominational battles too.
Yeah.
Like I grew up in the Nazarene church, but when I became an adult, I was struggling with the church I was at, and my dad gave me a piece of advice that I've held very dear, and that was, it's never about the denomination. Are you growing in your walk with God, and are you growing in community with others?
Yeah.
If you're meeting that, that sounds like a good church for you.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I wanted to ask, I guess, a little bit more about Rockharbor and regeneration before we end. Is there anything you wanted to talk about that we haven't covered?
I would just say that, it's not just, I know we kind of battled this concept at first when they first launched regeneration, that it was just for alcoholics, or it was just for addicts, but this is to me, it's more of a discipleship program. They're very rooted in the scriptures. I've seen people get freedom and healing from anything from a porn addiction to just simple anxiety, and people that just are so worried about the approval of others, that it's just a place where you can find freedom, healing, and a closer walk with God, and like I said, I tried to get my daughter to come for 2 years before she finally decide to come and check it out, and like, I just feel like everybody can benefit from it, and one thing I do respect about Rockharbor and their staff is most of the staff has gone through the program.
Nice.
And I love that about them. If we're gonna promote this, and maybe we should probably go through it and see what it's all about, and here's, talking about feeling unqualified or whatever. They ask you to get a mentor, and I mentored one of the pastors at our church when he went through it. And, I wrestled with God about that. It's like, I'm not qualified to mentor a pastor. And God just gently told me, you've been through the program, that's enough. I'll give you the rest. So I don't say that to brag or anything. It's just like, I don't know. God blows me away at every turn.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a common thing that you see in the church. It's like, oh, I'm not qualified. Oh, I don't know. Like, a lot of those almost get to be excuses we tell ourselves. Like, oh, I don't have the voice. Well, why don't you ask your brother Aaron? Like,
yeah,
we can put ourselves down too much that we don't go to those places we feel called.
Yeah. Well, and here's another thing I would say. God redeems, and nothing is wasted in God's economy, and he redeems everything. And the thing I love about coming to Christ, and he'll take that most broken part of me, whether it's a lustful addiction, or being an IV drug user, or actually taking steps to end my life. He takes those things that we don't want to look at, and he redeems them, and he weaponizes it against the enemy, and he uses those very things that you might have a ton of shame and guilt about, and he shows you how to use those to help somebody else.
Yeah.
And that is like, haha, devil, You thought you had me, but look who I'm helping now.
Yeah.
So I love that.
I think it's been one of my favorite sayings of all time. I know I've said it probably a couple times already just here, but it's like, it's such a powerful statement from Gigi and Kimbra that was the power of your story is not in the story itself, but in sharing it.
Yeah.
Like, that's overcoming that shame. And like you said, instead of being like, oh, I'm all ashamed of this,
yeah,
it's like, this affected your life, but now that you're sharing it and you're giving hope and you're letting other people see, hey, I don't have to be as ashamed. I can overcome this.
Yeah.
All that. It's like, okay, now I go from that inward focus, it's just me, I'm ashamed, to look at all the people who have been able to grow and heal and have hope and community because of just sharing what you went through.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of my first pastors in giving a sermon talking about, how to share the gospel and everything. He's like, just share your story.
Yeah. Just
share what God has done for you, because nobody can argue with that.
Yeah.
Like, they can't tell you, oh, that's not true. No, this is my story. This is what I did. This is how God worked in my life. That's they can't argue with it.
Yeah. I remember growing up, I used to hate when people shared their testimonies. It used to drive me nuts. And I think the reason was the way they were sharing them felt inauthentic.
Mm.
Like, it was just, our testimony is just a two-liner. God showed up, saved me, now I'm healed.
Yeah.
And it's like, no. Tell your story. Like, what did you walk through? What was one of Jordan Peterson's concepts that I've really kind of liked is actual hell on earth. Like, you walked through a period of hell on earth and God redeemed and saved you from that.
Yeah.
Show what you walked through and show what you came out on the other side with God's help. Like, share the whole story, not just a single line. Like, the power's in the whole story.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah. And thanks for watching the Brenton Peck podcast.